Okay, pizza ready to go. In your large mixing bowl, make sure it is a large mixing bowl, you should have 300 grams of strong flour. I know that you might not be able to get strong flour at the moment, any flour is difficult. The idea being when we're making a bread dough, which is what we're doing for this pizza, is that you're using strong dough because it's got something in called gluten. It's got a higher amount of gluten in it, and that's what's going to make it nice and stretchy. If you are using plain flour, that doesn't have as much gluten in, but it kind of will be okay for a pizza base because we're not looking for a rise like we would do with bread. So if you were trying to make bread with plain flour, as the bread would start to rise, it would crack all around kind of the outside. With pizza, we don't need to worry quite so much. So if you've got plain flour and that's what you're using, carry on using it. Okay, so 300 grams of flour, strong flour, plain flour in your mixing bowl. You should then have 7 grams of yeast as well, so dried yeast, and you can just sprinkle that straight into the bowl, along with a teaspoon of table salt. And again, just put that into your mixing bowl as well. If you've got sourdough starter, you can also add a little bit of that. It will just, enhance the flavour slightly. So I'm just going to put a little bit into mine as well. Just need to give it a bit of a mix. I don't know if you can see that. It's really bubbly and lively today. So I'm just going to add a little bit into there. Don't worry if you haven't got this. I just like the flavour, so I'm just going to add, it's like glue. Add a little bit into my pizza. So whilst you have got the 3 dried ingredients in your bowl, you need to then measure out 200 millilitres of warm water. So it needs to be warm so that we wake up the yeast. So warm, it should feel warm to the touch. When you put your little finger in there, it should feel tepid, warm. You can either use warm water straight from the tap, or if you boiled the kettle a little while ago, pour that water in, and then if it's still a little bit too hot, you can top it up with cold water. So 200 millilitres of warm water. Have a table knife or a palette knife to hand, because we'll start off gradually adding the liquid using the knife. Don't chuck it all in at once. We're going to gradually pour it in. Now, if you did have a mixer, like a KitchenAid, that sort of thing, you would put all of these ingredients into the mixer, gradually add the water and just let the mixer do the work. But we're going to do it the old-fashioned way today and do it by hand. So start to gradually pour your warm water into your bread mix. I've poured in about a quarter of it, and I'm just going to go through and just kind of cut through with the table knife or palette knife. I like to use a knife because it just saves my hands getting really mucky at this stage. A little bit more, and all you're doing is getting to the point where you've got dough and it will start to come together. Now, if we add too much water, it will be sloppy like porridge. If we don't add enough, then it won't hold together enough and it'll be too dry. A little bit more in. So less is more each time. (200 millilitres) is roughly what we recommend for this quantity for 300 grams of flour, but it depends on your flour as well. Depends how accurate you are with weighing out. I've got some wholemeal flour in here, so I did 250 grams of white strong flour and then 50 grams of wholemeal flour as well, just to increase the fibre content. So I may find that I need just a little bit more liquid. Okay, keep going, starting to come together now, and in a minute you'll be able to get your hand in, or hands, and bring it together to form a ball of dough. So I'm going to put a little bit more in. I've nearly used up my 200 millilitres. Don't forget I had a bit of sourdough starter in mine as well, so that will add a little bit more moisture. So if it's not sticking together very easily, keep going and just keep working your water in. And really, you should get to the point where it looks something like that. It's starting to come together. There we go. And then you'll be able to stop. Make sure you're going to have space for doing this because we're going to be doing some kneading, so it's a little bit of a workout doing this, and you're going to need space on your table to do that. So when your dough has roughly, and I'm talking really roughly here, come together, if you've got oil to hand, doesn't matter whether it's vegetable oil or olive oil, just take the oil and just pour literally no more than a teaspoonful on your table. I know that sounds really weird, but when we're kneading, actually putting oil onto the table works really well. It stops the dough from drying out and it stops it from sticking to everything, so trust me on this one. No more than a teaspoon because you don't want it to become an oil slick. And then just spread it around your workbench. No one said making pizza is going to be clean. There we go. So I'm just going to tuck my bowl out the way. And then we're going to start kneading it. Now when you start, it's going to be really rough, lumpy, bumpy, very bitty. But the process that we're going to be doing now for about 10 minutes is called kneading. And what you're doing is you are working the strong flour and you are working the gluten that's in the flour. So that's what's going to make it nice and stretchy and elasticy. And that's what we're looking for. Same as when we're making bread. So this will be the exactly the same way that we would make bread. We might have some butter in there as well, or we would add a little bit of oil into the dough. But I've put our oil measurement onto the table and then we work it in that way. Okay, so if it feels a little bit sticky, you can put a tiny little bit of flour, extra flour down now, but I mean literally tiny, and just coat it in it and then carry on. So when you're kneading, you're using the upper part of your hand, just below your wrist, and you're pushing it out, and then you're going to fold it over. Push it out, fold it over, and you keep going like that. And you will notice as you're doing it that the dough becomes much smoother and already starts to become stretchier. Now, temptation is to put loads of flour down. If you do, you are really going to dry your dough out, and then when the dough dries out too much, it won't stretch and it will feel very dense and heavy when you go to eat it. So kneading the bread dough, it's a good workout this. When we're teaching it at school, the pupils always say, oh, I'm really tired, my arms are aching. It makes me laugh. I say, come on, carry on. I get them to set the timer as well. Make sure they do knead it for 10 minutes. That's why using a mixer is so much easier, because you literally put it all in, the mixer does the work in half the time, and you can be doing something else whilst that's going on. So hit the dough on the table, slap it down, pull it out, stretch it out, fold it over. And it's those folds and then those stretches that help to work and release the gluten in the flour. We've got yeast in there, and yeast is a magic ingredient because we've added warm water to it. We've actually woken it up, so it was dry, was dormant, wasn't going to do anything. As soon as we add food, which is our flour, and water for moisture, then it will start to function, so it starts to breathe. And as it starts to breathe, it will start to produce carbon dioxide, and that's what's going to make our bread or our pizza base rise and have a much lighter texture. Of course, you don't have to do pizza this way. You could make a really simple flatbread using natural yogurt and self-raising flour, the easiest thing in the world to make, really quick. And you can make kind of a mock pizza with that. You could use pizza bases that have already been made. You could use French bread, you know, anything like that to make a quick pizza. So as I'm kneading, my dough is becoming smoother, it's becoming stretchier. Now one of the tests that we do is we hold the dough up and we see how far we can pull it without it splitting. If it doesn't go very far and it starts to split straight away, we know that we need to give it a bit more oomph with the kneading and carry on. If you're using plain flour, you won't have the stretching quite the same way as if you've used strong flour, because it doesn't have that gluten. So when we add water to strong flour, it creates this like elastic feeling, and that is what the gluten is. So keep going. It's not been 10 minutes yet. You might be feeling tired if you're doing it with somebody else helping. Get them to do it for a little while as well. But the more we knead it, and notice I haven't put any more flour down now or any more oil, it's not sticky. It might feel slightly tacky, but it actually doesn't stick to our hands. And a good sign of how you're working, actually by the end of it, your hands should be relatively clean. If it is sticking to your hands, because your dough's slightly wetter, you could always just sprinkle a little bit of flour onto your hands and then work it in that way. I'm going to be out of breath doing this in a minute. So keep going, stretching, folding. You can give it a little slap on the table and then fold it over again and just keep repeating. And the more we do this, the lighter and the further our dough is going to go when we come to roll it out as well. Now if we were making bread, at the end of this process we would leave it to prove for 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how warm the room is that you're in. With pizza, you don't have to do that, so you'll look at recipes and some will say leave to prove for an hour, like this in a bowl covered. Some recipes will say leave to prove for 20 minutes, some recipes will say you don't need to prove it at all. So if you want a really deep, kind of deep pan pizza, you need to let the dough prove, because you want the rise on it. If you prefer a thinner, kind of crispier base pizza, then making the dough, rolling it out, topping it and baking it straight away is the way forward for that. So keep going, and hopefully you can give me a thumbs up if you're not covered in dough. Your dough should be looking much smoother and nice and stretchy as well. You can do something else as a test. Now I know mine's not quite there yet, called the window pane test, and you should be able to kind of hold it up to the light and thin the dough out without it splitting, so you should be able to see through it almost like a window pane. Mine's not quite there yet. And because I'm using wholemeal flour, you don't quite get the same effect on the window pane because of the bits that are in it. But if you're using white flour, you do. So, I'm going, keeping kneading. Now if your dough is quite hard and you're thinking actually no, it's not stretching and it's breaking really quickly, you need a little bit more water in there. So you can put your hand in some water, flick the water onto the dough and then fold it in that way. And just keep going. And we're almost there. If we don't knead it enough and get this nice and stretchy and the dough nice and loose, what happens is when you go to roll it out, it just keeps shrinking back in again. Now, what you also need to do, and you can do this now, is to turn your oven on, if you haven't done so already. Turn it on to about 220 degrees Celsius or gas mark 7. So nice hot oven. You give me a thumbs up if your dough is looking nice and smooth and stretchy. I know there's a few people that are going to come on and do this later. pasties were a good success yesterday. Much more of a challenging recipe, but we had some really good outcomes. Thinking next week of doing something baked for VE Day on Friday, so watch this space for that one. Okay, I've been kneading for about 7 minutes. I'm going to stop in a moment. So, is it stretchy? Is it smoother? Can you kind of start to shape it out without it tearing and breaking? If the answer is yes, I'm preparing it to eat later. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So if you're making these pizzas to put on a baking tray and cook later on, you could actually do the whole thing, top it and everything, and then cover it, put them in the fridge. Just puts it to sleep when it's in the fridge, so it won't prove hugely before you cook it. But don't leave it at room temperature because it will just keep on proving. Okay, so oven's on if you're doing it, cooking it shortly, and hopefully your dough's looking nice and smooth. We are going to be ready to roll it out. Now, you might have a pizza tray, you might have a baking tray, you might be doing some mini ones. So depending on what you want to do, either portion it up now. This will make one large pizza and it will fill, I think that's a 30cm pizza tray. So this dough, once it's stretched out and rolled out, will fit this tray. If you're doing mini ones, then you can just put them onto a lightly greased baking sheet, cut them out and we'll roll them out. Just put that out of the way for a minute. Now, when we're rolling out, you might find you need a little bit of flour, but we don't want too much. So start off with a nice neat shape. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of flour onto my rolling pin, and then you can start to roll out. So for those of you that did the pasties yesterday, similar principle. I've lost you. Not sure what that means. Hopefully I'm still live. 2 rolls on the table, and then turn the dough a quarter turn. So imagine you roll into like towards 12 o'clock and then turn the dough a quarter turn, roll again. That way it won't stick to the table. So you should have ovens on, and we should be at the point where we are rolling out the dough. It doesn't have to be round. Who said pizzas need to be round? They don't have to. If you've got a square tray or a rectangular tray, use that. Okay, because we haven't let the dough rest, it will be a little bit tougher to roll out, but it should get there, and you will notice now that it looks nice and smooth. Do 2 rolls, just keep turning it, and don't forget dough's very pliable, so we can pull it into the shape that we want to help it fit on our tray as well. Just keep going round. You literally want, if you're using a pizza tray like I've got, you literally want to fill that tray with the dough. Just keep pulling it around. Try and get it so that it's fairly even in thickness as well when you're rolling it out. 2 rolls, just keep turning it round. I used some wholemeal flour just to increase the fibre content, because I know my children are going to have this for lunch. So it's a good way of getting it into them. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and then lift it onto my tray. So use your rolling pin, lay the rolling pin onto the dough, and then just fold it over a little bit, just helps to lift it up, and then onto your tray. Now I haven't greased my tray because it's non-stick, but if you're worried, then give it just a light greasing with some vegetable or olive oil. Okay, place the dough on. Make sure you've got it right round to the edges, and then you can decide if you want a crust or no crust. One of the questions we always ask at school when we're doing pizza is, what's the point in having a crust? You know, do pizzas have to have a crust? No, they don't. It's to help keep the filling on. So if you're using like an open tray, it helps to keep the filling on. And it's also gives you kind of a little handle to hold on to when you pick it up and eat it. Okay, so with the crust, there's two ways of doing this. If you've got a ridge around your tray, you can naturally just go around and shape the pizza to fit into the ridge. If you haven't, and you're doing kind of freestyle pizzas on a baking tray, just get a little bit of water. You might have a little bit left in your container from what you've used. Just put your finger in there and just dab around the edge, around the outside, and then just fold it over and pinch it in so that you've got a bit of a crust on there. And if you don't want a crust, just spread it out to the edges and don't do one. I'm just going to go around and pinch mine in. Also, it makes it easier when you're trying to put your topping on, the sauce isn't kind of slopping all over the place. Okay, so once you've got your crust on there, you are then going to put your topping on. Mistake people have made before is they'd fill their pizza while it's on the table before they put it onto their tray. Don't do that, because you can never ever pick it up. So we're going to top the pizza now that it's on the tray. So if you're looking for a deep pan pizza, you'd stop at this point and just let it prove for 20 minutes, just so that it puffs up a little bit, rises, and then you could top it. You could top it and then just leave it to sit for 20 minutes out as well, or you could build your whole pizza, cover it, put it in the fridge like it is, and then take it out for later on when you want to cook it. Topping the pizza, I'm sure you don't need me to go through that, but you want to put on roughly about 100 millilitres of pasatta. So I normally just freestyle it, pour some into the middle, and then spread it around with my spoon, and then I can decide if I'm going to add some more to it. Pizza topping, I'm literally using pasatta, and it's got some Italian herbs in it. You could use a mixture of like pasatta with some dried herbs in it. You could put some garlic into it. So whatever you like to put in your sauce. Some people like bits in their sauce, some people don't. So pasatta's the smooth option, which is why I think it works quite well on a pizza sauce. If you put too much on, it's going to make your pizza base really soggy, and it stops it from crisping up quite so easily. So start off with less, just spread it around with the back of your spoon, and then you can add a little bit more if you need to. Try and avoid getting too much on the crust, because obviously the crust is the outer bit. When you're cooking it, that's the bit that will start to cook first, and then it burns. So avoid getting it all over the crust. Okay, so that's topped. Then we're going to do cheese, then we're going to do toppings. So your cheese, roughly around 150 grams of cheese. So I've got a mix of mozzarella and cheddar mix. If you've got the balls of really nice mozzarella, I've got those as well, but my children don't like them. They just want normal cheese, as they call it. But you could just literally shred the mozzarella balls over the top of it. So 150 grams would roughly cover this pizza. Again, I'm just going to freestyle it and just put enough on so that it covers, and then I'm going to put my toppings on top of that. And then I said sort of up to 3 toppings. I always class cheese as one of the key ingredients, and then my toppings on top of that. if you have too many, I know when we're cooking at school, the pupils, you know, like to pile on everything on there, and then they've got so many toppings that the pizza dough then struggles to cook and it stays quite wet and soggy. So you want to avoid having too many. I always say to them, less is more, less is more. And obviously if you're using things like sausage or pepperoni, things like that, they're obviously quite, they can be quite oily as well, so you don't want to put too many on there. So I've got some chopped peppers, so I'm just going to put those on. I've got some barbecue chicken and I've got some olives as well, because the kids like those. So I'm going to put those peppers on, put my olives on. So once you've topped it, either cover it, stick it in the fridge for later, or get ready to put it in your nice hot oven. We want a nice hot oven so that it really kickstart the yeast, so it will help the dough to rise a little bit and also help to crisp up the bread or pizza base as well. Because we've used olive oil in there, that also helps to get a nice crispy texture with the pizza base. So just got some chicken, barbecue chicken. I didn't make this, it was from the supermarket. Put that on there. And then that's pizza topped and ready to go into the oven. I've also got some fresh herbs, so I'm just going to lay a few basil leaves on there as well. At this point you could just drizzle a little bit of olive oil over the top. You could do a bit of seasoning over the top as well, and then put it into the oven. Some people prefer to drizzle it with a little bit of oil when it comes out of the oven, just before they serve it. And that, in 30 minutes, you've made your pizza base, you've topped it, and it's going to go into the oven, nice hot oven, 220 degrees, for around 20 to 25 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. You want it to be nice and golden brown underneath as well. No soggy bottoms like we said yesterday with the pasties that we made. And yeah, at the end of it, it should be nice and golden brown and ready to eat. If you're not cooking it now, cover it, stick it in the fridge. It will go back to sleep and it will be absolutely fine. And then you can take it out, leave it at room temperature for about 10 minutes before you put it into the oven. Okay, 220 degrees, 20 minutes, keep an eye on it, and then you should have pizza ready for your lunch. Thanks for watching.